only that it was Frankish blood he would soon clean from his blade. He must have feared it could be the blood of old friends. The Frankish political and cultural consensus that had subjugated a continent across the last 2 generations had fallen apart at the seams. Angilbert had come to Fontenoy with the Emperor Lothar I, the eldest son of the recently deceased ruler Louis the Piouss. Lothar had been co-emperor with his father for the last 24 years, but was now facing off against his 2 younger brothers, their respective armies composed of families now torn asunder. Friends who had so recently campaigned with, socialized with, and loved one another, now stared across the battlefield with vengeance in their eyes. Introduction. Origin Stories 732 to 750. Over the course of the 8th century, a group called the Franks built an empire with fire and sword. They expanded their borders, subjugated their enemies, and made alliances with their neighbors, including the powerful Byzantine emperors in Constantinople and the even more powerful caliphs in Baghdad. Under their leaders at the time, a family we know today as the Carolingians, the Franks would rule an expanse of land from beyond Rome in Italy to the North Sea, and from beyond the Pyrenees in the west to beyond the Danube in the east. On Christmas Day, 800, one of those rulers named Charlemagne, from the Latin Carolus Magnus, or Charles the Great, was crowned by the Bishop of Rome as a new Roman emperor. But, like all empires, this one rested on a foundation of lies. The Franks' power was real, yes, but their empire was built as much with quill and parchment as it was with iron and blood. The story they told about and to themselves in their histories, in their theological works, and in their art made it all seem so fated. Their destiny as the new Israelites, the builders of the kingdom of God on earth, seemed to manifest itself all too clearly into the early part of the 9th century. To create this story of themselves, dissension, revolts, and disasters that had been a reality from the outset of the Frankish imperial project were elided, silenced, papered over. They wrote backward from the present, from what they saw as the pinnacle, to make the past a predestined prelude to the present. The story they told themselves, in other words, was one that was never intended to be factual. It was intended to be true, to reveal a hidden divine plan they saw for themselves, to demonstrate that they were inevitable. Apexes are precarious, though. Over the course of the 9th century, the tapestry of the Franks' history unraveled as quickly as it had come together. Military victories became harder to come by. Losses piled up. Fathers oppressed sons, or sons didn't show due respect, depending on perspective. The Franks' intellectual project to justify themselves continued, but couldn't ultimately bear the weight of a crushing new reality. A vision of unity persevered even as the functioning of power and society factionalized. Angilbert's Agony, written in the midst of a civil war when brothers turned blades upon brothers, leaps from its vellum and across the centuries to show us how the lies they told collapsed in on themselves. Oathbreakers builds toward the critical years of 841 to 843, toward the horror of the Battle of Fontenoy. At that time, immediately after the death of Emperor Louis the Piouss, died 840, a civil war erupted within the Frankish realm, as his sons fought one another for power. Much of the war was waged by proclamations and military maneuvers that were mostly posturing. Lothar I, died 855, the eldest of the brothers and Angilbert's patron, inherited the imperial title after his father died and immediately claimed lordship over his younger siblings, Louis the German, died 876, and Charles the Bald, died 877. All 3 brothers wanted to maintain the illusion of unity, a fantasy required if the Franks truly held a special status, but the youngest brothers nonetheless wanted to rule independent kingdoms that had been carved out of imperial territory.